Alright, this video is a cooking video for Paleo Nanaimo bars. The first thing you've got to do is wash your hands. Always when cooking, the first thing you've got to do is to wash your hands. I only video one episode of hand washing, and I reuse it at all the different segments where it's recommended that you wash your hands. And in this case, I even cleaned under my fingernails because I felt that they weren't clean enough. I had been working with the vanilla bean, and I got some vanilla under my nails, actually. So the first thing is we get out our double boiler, and it's not really obvious, but there's just enough water in the bottom of the double boiler. And remember, you can also use a Pyrex cooking bowl. But the idea is that the boiling water contacts and covers the bottom of the interior bowl or pot, so that it heats up to the temperature of boiling water, but does not heat any higher. And normally when you're cooking, the bottom of your pot is getting quite hot, while the rest of your pot has to take the heat away through the food. And so anything contacting the bottom of the food is hotter than the rest of the temperature, and that's how you get burns. And with chocolate being as sensitive as it is, it's very important. I used up all my cocoa in this one, my cocoa butter. This has a much higher quantity of dark to white chocolate than a lot of my recipes, because there's going to be a lot of sweetness in this recipe with the sweetened coconut and the almond and poppy seed, and dark chocolate just really goes well with this one. So off to the stove that goes. Beautiful little blend. I'd say that's about half and half dark and light chocolate. And onto the stove. And I wash my stove often, but sometimes things get built up, so never mind the little flecks of black. So here we are. It's boiling away, and I turned it down to simmer. There's lots of cutscenes. You know, it didn't happen immediately. Here's another cutscene. And I'm stirring it to see if everything's melted, and it looks like everything is. Because the dark stuff takes longer than the light stuff to melt, and often just sits on the bottom with a little lump, and you have to stir it to find out. Plus you got to stir it to incorporate the two chocolates together. The smell of this stuff is so lovely. So let's take that back over to this counter where I've got to set up a trivet, which isn't currently set up, but I grabbed the trivet and away we go. That's a nice one. It's got non-slip material on one side and stainless steel on the other. It's a nice one. Now, unlike the chocolate balls, I remembered to put the honey in after it's melted. So this chocolate got hard real nice. I think they call that annealing. It annealed. I don't know. I don't do a lot of research. Here I am just putting in some salt. Salt? Salt is really nice. Just a grace of it. It actually takes a lot of the bitterness away. And for some reason, having salt in something causes your sweet taste buds to work better. And it gets sweeter. Adding salt makes things sweeter. But only a little bit. If you notice the salt too much, then it's too much. Although I like salted chocolate. If you've ever had chocolate with little bits of salt in it. So I did lick my finger, and then I washed my hands. And I don't think I put a hand washing episode in here. So, anyways, we're just stirring the honey in, get it all incorporated, and I believe that's all I put in the chocolate. Here, I'm tasting to see if it's sweet enough. Did you see what I did with the spoon? I did not stick the same spoon in my mouth as I have in the chocolate. I poured a little bit of chocolate onto the spoon that I stuck in my mouth so that I kept the chocolate clean. This is one of the techniques you use when you're cooking to keep from infecting people with things like E. coli and who knows what might be in your mouth. Human mouths are bacteria-ridden places. Now we've got to get out the cookie pan, or the cookie pan. I don't know what you call it. It's a baking pan, I guess. Oh, quick hand wash because I'm going to be handling the food again. So, and I've sped these up to 4x. There. Now, the pan. And you can see the residue of wax from the last time I made these. I find that the wax from the wax paper tends to adhere to the pan just a little and leave behind a residue, but since I'm using wax paper again, I don't sweat it too much. You know, I give them a quick wash, and they don't always wash up, and I don't really worry about it because, as I say, it's just wax paper residue, and there's wax paper going down. So at first I thought, oh, maybe I could do a tricky thing I saw on the web where I put one sheet one way and one sheet the other way, and I went, what a waste of wax paper. We'll just go with one sheet. Maybe if I put it diagonal. No, not diagonal. Okay, straight up. So I start pressing the sheet in and manage to, right about here, I put a hole in it. And, darn it, a hole. Okay, move the hole off because if you leave a hole in it, the chocolate's going to pour right through underneath. So, shift it, move it, put the hole off to the side, and press it in again. And it's just fussiness, you know. You basically want to try and get that thing down in all the corners and have it fully covered, because otherwise the chocolate's going to pour around the wax paper down underneath and render the operation pointless. Now I had to go to my neighbor and borrow the shredded coconut, because as it turned out I didn't have enough at home. So you fit out the pan, I'd say about half an inch thick at the most with the coconut, and then you don't pour all the chocolate in. You have to leave enough chocolate to cover the top of your pan afterwards, because there's 2 layers of chocolate in this. There's the bottom layer with the coconut and the top layer that just covers it. So, how much do you see me measuring? I just kind of hope I've got enough, and I just roll with it. I knew I didn't have a lot of chocolate. So I'm making sure that every layer in this thing is extremely flat and level. But first, because I didn't have much chocolate, I was at this point praying that I had enough to fully incorporate the coconut. So there was lots of stirring. Ordinarily, I've got enough chocolate and I just pour it all over the place, and I have a pretty high chocolate to coconut ratio. But I'm actually really happy with how this turned out, and in future I will be using a great deal less chocolate. And I will probably do this part of the process in a bowl, not in the pan. Although it worked out just fine. It was no problem to stir it in the pan like this. It just would have been easier to stir in a bowl and then spatula into the pan and flatten out. But no matter, I just gamely went ahead. And this is the thing with creativity and cooking is, even though things are, your brain's on fire with, oh my God, this is going to fail, you just soldier forward and you do your best, because you know the ingredients taste good. Therefore, however messy it might turn out, it's going to taste good. And the lovely thing with chocolate is you could stick it back in the double boiler if it's really bad and make something else out of it. I didn't have to in this case. This worked. I just kept turning it and stirring it until all of the pockets of dry coconut were moistened with the melted chocolate. And it made a beautiful base. I mean, this treat was enjoyed to the finish at the party. Not one piece of this chocolate came home with me, nor was it left over. So here I am flattening it out, and like I say, on this recipe, you really want these layers to be as flat as possible. The flatter the better, because if you leave valleys and peaks, then it takes twice as much material to make a solid layer on each layer. So you really want to press it down flat. Real flat with that spatula, real level. And I really should have sped up this segment of the recipe, because watching me press this flat is a little tedious. More tedious than doing it, I can tell you that, but I think I've just about got it here. Boink, boink, boink. This is my favorite spatula. It's really stiff. It's all one piece. There are no little cracks, crevices, or seams where dirt can build up. And yet it's stiff enough to press, and flexible enough to make a really good seal against your bowl and really clean it out. So I like the color too. I like colored things in the kitchen. You used to only have 2 colors, wood and metal. Now you've got this wonderful variety of colors. Here I am trying to save as much of the chocolate as possible by pressing it, and finally went, okay, that's just stupid. I'll lick it clean. I think I did lick it clean, but later. So into the fridge this goes, because it's got to firm up. There you go. I'd say that they sit in the fridge about half an hour between processes. And wash your hands again, because you're going to get in here and start using food. You're going to be touching food, and you've been sitting at your computer or playing with your dogs or engaging in some other task and getting your hands dirty. In goes the last of my almond flour. And at this point I realized I didn't have enough almond flour. And I'm like, oh, I had to go next door for the shredded coconut. I'm almost out of chocolate. Now I don't have any almond flour. And I'm making a cooking video. So I dug around in the cupboard and found some poppy seeds. And I learned years ago that half and half, half poppy seed, half almond flour makes a really wonderful, wonderful marzipan. And then just before I stuck it in the mixer, I remembered, oh, I want to put vanilla in here. So what I'm holding in my hand here is a vanilla bean. And what I'm doing after I cut the end off is I'm slicing the vanilla bean in half, and it's flatter along one direction than in the other direction. And you want to slice it so that you're pulling apart the two flat sides, because you want basically two flat bits. So I'm threading the knife in and then splitting it open. And then when you have the skin open, you scrape. See those little black seeds? That black goopy stuff? Those are teeny tiny seeds in resin, and that's the vanilla flavor. You're not keeping the skin part, you're keeping the seed part. Now here's a tip. When you're done scraping the seeds out of the vanilla, rub it under your hairline, on your throat, on your wrists. It's perfume. Use it for perfume. Rub it in your hair if you like. It'll give you a wonderful vanilla scent that people will be like, what smells so good? And it'll be you. And you can also put it in a potpourri or sachet if you want to reuse that vanilla bean. And you could even put it in one of those little filigreed pendants designed for putting scented things in, and wear it around your neck. I would not keep that vanilla bean for more than a day, because it's either going to dry out and lose its aroma, or it's going to get moldy. But yeah, you can rub it all over. You can see where I got vanilla bean seeds all over my fingers. Now remember, my fingers are clean, so it's okay to stick them in. So I went ahead and, to get more of the vanilla out, I rubbed the powdery combination of almond flour and poppy seed all over the vanilla bean, and then scraped it off again. And that got a lot more vanilla into my flavoring, or into my dessert. So there you go. I decided at this point that some of you watching don't have a power mixer. You don't have a stand mixer like me. You've got to stir it by hand. So I thought, okay, in sympathy with all of you who have to stir it by hand, I'm going to stir it by hand. And man, was I sorry. If you've got a stand mixer, use it, because this stuff is hard and heavy. But here I am with one of my many wooden spoons. First, I stirred it and incorporated and found the lumps and squished them flat, and then made sure that there was an even distribution of almond and poppy seed. Then I poured in small amounts of honey at a time, just a little bit at a time. And first you cover the honey with the powder. You don't stick the spoon in the middle of the honey. You put the honey in the middle of the powder, then cover it with the powder, and then start mixing it around. And that way it doesn't stick so bad to your spoon. And then I did it wrong the next time, and getting the honey off that spoon. See, that's what happens if you just stick the spoon into the ball of honey. Now you've got twice a sticky mess, and it's much harder to stir. And away we go. I think at some point I think this is sped up 2 times, because it's really, really tedious watching me stir. And oh man, did my arm get a workout. So yeah, if you've got a stand mixer, use it. If not, well, you've probably got a pretty strong arm, because you're doing things the hard way. See, again, honey all over the spoon. And oops, I screwed up again, I'm thinking. What? Soldier on. Persistence, perseverance, and trust are the best tools you're going to have when you're making recipes, especially if you're being creative. So work. And remember, small amounts of honey at a time, and work them in. And then add a little honey and work them in. Because if you put in too much honey, you'll have to add more powder. And in this case, I had no more powder to add. I could have added a few more poppy seeds, but I would have had a hard time fixing it if I put in too much honey. And what you're after here is something that clumps nicely. You don't want it to be super sticky and runny. You just want it to be at a point where if you clump it into a ball, it stays that way. And as you can see, it's starting to get nice and doughy, you know, like a putty. It's starting to get like a putty. So that's exactly what we're after. And pretty much right now, I'm just mixing around here and there to make sure that I've got it all incorporated. Top to bottom, side to side, the whole thing. And as you can see, I've got a nice clumpy putty. So I had a taste. Now I washed my hands again. And no, after I lick it, the spoon goes into the dishwashing. That's a new spoon. Actually, I think I put the tasting clip in the wrong spot. And now that I'm recording the narration, I'm not going to fix it. So I think the tasting happened after this point. But at any rate, don't ever, ever introduce your spit to the food you're cooking. Just don't do it. So it was after this point that I actually tasted the spoon. But so I pressed it down lightly, but here's a trick that I have. I take a glass, I make my hands and the glass soaking wet so that the almond flour and honey don't stick. See? Now I use the glass as a roller. Now the reason I don't use a pie roller is because they're too long, they won't fit in the pan. And I want to get right to the corner edges because what I want here is a perfectly smooth, flat, and level surface because I have very little chocolate. The chocolate layer is very thin. And if the surface isn't even all around, and this is me using my hands to find the high spots and mash them into the low spots to even out the levels. And then I'll roll it again with the glass to make it perfectly flat because of all my fingerprints. And if it's not perfectly flat, then it takes more chocolate to cover. See, there's valleys here, so I need to get... I washed my hands and the cup again because it was sticky on it. And here I'm leveling out all of those peaks and valleys from my fingers and the corners because I need this to be perfectly level and flat so the chocolate flows nicely onto it and I get a nice top finish, and it takes very little chocolate to cover. I just want a thin skin of chocolate, not not a whole chocolate bar on top. So here I had been reheating my chocolate because there's been quite a bit of time passed. So I had the chocolate on, still in the double boiler on the stove. Oh, got to give it a quick stir. And it's got honey in it, so I didn't heat it up very much. I just kept it warm. And pour and squeegee. This is another one of my squeegees because, of course, the pink one's dirty now. And, it's one of the beautiful things about having a lot of utensils. All that stuff that's going in that bowl is going to get licky, licky, lick, lick, yum, yum. Into the fridge it goes. You see how shiny it is? Okay, just before we take it out of the fridge, another hand washing session. And now, you can see it looks waxy. See, it went from shiny to dull? That's how you know the chocolate has set. So over to the stove we go. It's nice and hard. And I grab a cutting board and I upend it and out it comes. Look at how easily that comes out because of the wax paper. That's why I use the wax paper. I mean, you can try greasing the pan, but it's not going to be like this. Really, when you're working with chocolate, just use the wax paper. It makes your life better. And no, I don't think saran wrap works as well. Wax paper is worth having around. You can wrap sandwiches in it for lunch instead of saran wrap. It biodegrades in a way that plastic wrap doesn't. And if a turtle eats it in the ocean, it's not going to kill him. So, that's my tin that I'm packaging it in, and I'm cutting it into squares. I just grab a big knife. I'm cutting it upside down because I'm thinking that if I cut it from the top, the thin layer of hard chocolate on top is going to really bend and break all over. And it did bend and break anyway, but I think it was less breakage than if I had cut the top first. So they were kind of messy. The honey had leaked out of the chocolate on top, but it wasn't serious. And like I say, everybody had fun. It might not work for Julia Child's magazine. And here's me tasting again. See, now I thought, well, let's turn it over and see if it works better. See how it's all fracturing and breaking up. And I don't think it made any difference. Any way you cut it, that honey had leached out of the chocolate just enough to give me a hard time. But at least I was able to manually control the chocolate layer on top just a little bit. And I really should have sped this up or edited it short, because here we are, choppity chop chop. But I wanted to give you guys the full experience so that when you start cooking this stuff, you have a lot less surprises. You have a better idea how the process goes. So into the, and here's the interesting thing. Although the cookie tin that I'm using is the same size as the pan, not all of the chocolate will fit into the one tin, because there are little tiny air gaps between each bar, as there will be. I mean, you got to be able to get your fingers in. And those take up enough that I needed a second tin. And I wound up taking the smaller tin to the party, because I remembered that these parties are actually quite small. And it's really nice to have chocolates that last a week or so at home. And I keep them in the fridge, and yeah, I eat off them for about a week. There you go. Look at that. And that is the delicious treat finished.